All right, here we are. We got a reasonable hand here on the play. Still not great. Not sure. I'm content to keep this one, but I think at the end of the day, I will keep. We have a lot of mana sources in our deck. Dismember to buy ourselves a little bit of time against early threats. And then 2 reasonable early threats of our own. I'm going to lead on Wastes. I think it's a little less telling than Shafet Dunes, but not a ton. Okay. So against Affinity here, the Dismember will come in handy, but a lot of the rest of what we're doing is not terribly relevant. The most annoying thing here is hopefully Thalia. It's possible our opponent left excuse me, not Welding Jar, left Mox Opal in their hand or something of those along those lines. Maybe they were going to try to cast Cranial Plating this turn, and now it's slightly more annoying. Something like that. We'll see. Master of Ethereum. All right, well, we didn't inhibit that at all, but we do have a Dismember for it. Oh, that's a toughie. Yeah, I feel like I just absolutely have to Dismember this Master of Ethereum while we have the ability to do so, which is a bummer, considering we also have the ability to cast Thought-Knot Seer, and this is getting worse the longer we wait. Plus, the way our opponent's hand is set up, it's clear that their hand has more high CMC threat density. When they haven't done very much early, have a Master of Ethereum and still have multiple cards. They also potentially have a Gal Blast, which would be nice to resolve TKS when that isn't available. But again, I think there's too much inherent risk to leaving Master of Ethereum. Whoops. No, I didn't need to do that. I could be wrong, though. We'll go ahead and dismember that, play the Horizon Canopy, attack for 2, and be done. I'm really sad about the TKS, but like I said, their hand does appear to be high CMC threat dense, but it could just have a lot of lands and maybe a Gal Blast and another threat, so we might not really get anything with this TKS if that's the case. Hopefully we can still snatch something up next turn, and maybe not even have to use our Simian Spear Guide if that's the case. All right, Master of Ethereum goes down, but we're down to 15. All right, Signal Pest likely to draw this turn, but not necessarily, I suppose. Yeah, another Master of Ethereum. This is the exact kind of hand that's going to be trouble for us, I think. Unless we draw another Dismember, which we did not. I think I'm going to go ahead and cast this Thought Knot. Check to see if that's a Gal Blast, I suppose. But we're in a bad spot. We're in a bad spot. Vault Scourge. This Master of Ethereum is going to be pretty much impossible for us to take off the table from here. I guess Dismember in combat is a way. Don't really see us winning this game. Looks like no matter which line we took, we were going to get stuck facing down a Master of Ethereum we couldn't beat. I suppose if I had TKS the turn earlier, I would have been able to take this Master of Ethereum. At which point... man, I'm in a really bad way. I guess we'll do this. At which point I could have tried to dismember the other one in combat the following turn. Obviously, I didn't know my opponent's hand had a Master of Ethereum, and it felt of utmost importance to rid ourselves of the current one, but... Oh. Tapped for green, apparently. It's not what we want to do there. Yeah, maybe that was the line. I mean, obviously I didn't know they had another Master Ethereum specifically, but it was clear, or at least seemed very likely they had another threat. So it's just a question of whether we believed that we had the ability to play around it or not. And if we didn't have the ability to play around it, then you just dismember the Master and hope that your read is wrong, that their hand is actually bad, and they just have a bunch of lands, and that's why they haven't been doing stuff. But maybe you think you can still win that game if you start with TKS, take whatever threat they have, and hope to dismember that one in combat. Maybe that's the line. I'm not sure. I do not love Chalice here. I mean, you can get some like Chalice on 0 action. That's not irrelevant. I probably do want this. Worship also doesn't seem abysmal. It's hard not to feel like Worship is a trap in this deck, since you're not usually that heavy on resources, like considering how many things you have, like Simian Spirit Guides and Gemstone Caverns. You're often, even stuff like Chalice, you're often using a lot of resources to put very few things into play, which means they could get us with a Gal Blast in some spots. I mean, maybe you are supposed to leave like things like Chalice in on the play, but it feels kind of like a relatively easy cut. I guess Thalia has some similar problems, right? But it feels like more of a road bump to me. And I guess Arbiter is also quite poor. Copter seems great, even though we're siding in 3 Stony Silence. I think it's still worth it. Thalia is a little slow, but also seems like it could be super annoying. I don't mind having Dismembers against Affinity, actually, even though they're taxing. They're coming at our life total pretty aggressively. Yeah, I guess that's a lot of bad ones, so maybe I do want these, but we're talking about siding out a lot of quite a few creatures here. I suppose these just aren't doing anything, right? Basically at all. So those are probably the easiest cut, which leaves us still with some number of Chalice. Thalia seems like a fine road bump, but I could definitely see cutting one. So do I want to cut a couple Chalice for a couple Worship? I feel like they have the potential to be high enough impact to be worth their slot, whereas the Chalice are going to be relatively low impact. Even on the play, I could also cut a Gemstone Cavern on the play. Don't hate that, actually. Maybe we try that out. 3 Chalice is kind of a weird number to keep. So obviously with 3 Stony Silence, we're inclined to mulligan a little more aggressively than we might otherwise. This hand seems reasonable, very middle of the road. I don't think it's exciting enough for me to keep when there's 3 Stony Silence in the deck, though I do think it was an okay hand. This hand is worse. Very little to be excited about in this hand. Very little. My early removal spell is quite poor. I wonder if I should add Purge even. That seems a little crazy. No, Purge might have been fine post board because they'll also have Aether Grid. Probably should have brought in Purge. Oh well, I think this is actually a mulligan as well. This hand is a keep. It's again not terribly exciting, but has the mana at this point. I can't really be aggressive, mulling much more aggressively, and has some things to buy us some time. This Thalia, I think we're threat light enough. It's going to have to be a top. And I'm not going to Chalice on 0 here, though that is somewhat of a consideration. Would have got an Ornithopter. Vault Scourge. Man, would have got a Bobble too. Would have paid off. I am going to put a Chalice on 1 here, I think. It locks out Galblast as well as a bunch of random stuff. It's not very exciting. Signal Pest and Galblast mostly being the prizes there. Again, not incredibly exciting, but I think relevant, especially with the worships, interestingly enough. I know we shaved worships shaved chalices to make room for worships, but hitting Galblast / potential dispatches, anything of that sort, makes our worships a lot better because it's near impossible for our opponent to kill our creatures at that point. Maybe Aether Grids, something of that sort, but all right. Found Ravager. It's likely wise for me to dismember that Ravager already. While they don't have very high artifact density. And it's still mana efficient for me, and it's going to get worse for me to hold this when I'm casting a Thalia this turn. So probably just put a counter on the Scourge. Yep. That is just fine. Use this Cavern of Souls as a colorless / white dual land. Except for our Cat Clerics, which we sided out anyway, so how convenient. It works out. Another Ravager, not great. We're not in a great position here. Thalia, pretty poor. I don't think my opponent would sack 2 artifacts this Ravager, and if they did, it would be pretty annoying for them, plus I have this backup Thalia, so I guess I'm hitting them. So basic island and basic mountain is a little unusual. But I'm cutting off Smasher as a top deck if I try to strip mine them here. They have so many cards. I think I need to do this. They are obviously trying to hit lands for some higher CMC threats. I want, or at least just multiple threats. I need to restrict that a little bit to buy myself some time since my hand is obviously so bad. So hoping, crossing our fingers for the strip mine, I think is the best play there. And again, not that unreasonable. I guess I play this out since we have Horizon Canopy in our deck. And it's probably time to be thinking a lot less about an attack. Oh no, the Darksteel Citadel. That's not great. More food for the Ravager and a land to help unlock things a bit there. They just pass and we find another Dismember, which is pretty painful. Also, no longer a successful tool for killing this Vault Scourge, right? Yeah. So we're definitely in the hope our opponent goes for it mode. Looks like they might go for it on the Ornithopter, which puts me to 1 here. They just pass. Don't believe I can hit anything here reasonable. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense to cast this. Smasher. Yeah, I mean, I'm just on board once I cast this. And my opponent knows it, obviously, with the Thalia. I can't possibly even cast something. So once again, I suppose we're in the hope our opponent goes for it early mode. But I think our opponent will not make that kind of a mistake. It doesn't seem very likely for them to do that. They're much more likely to put the counters on the Ornithopter here. And then even if I dismember, I would be dead. Or just wait. In which case I get another draw step, but yeah. I'm not sure what would save me here anymore, because Ratchet Bomb would be too late now. I guess we get to rep Path. But not being able to, of course, I guess I'm not really repping Path at all. I have to rep Celestial Purge, excuse me. Purge for this, I guess. But then they still just put the counters here, and I can't be repping much. All right, it's time. Opponent's tired of waiting. I thought at this point that they would just wait another turn, but... Yep, I can dismember one of these and then be dead. So, let's do it. Alright. Too bad. A little bit of a clunker. Obviously, mold 5 there. Couldn't find something like a Stony Silence or really a more exciting hand in the matchup. Obviously, our opener was very keepable, so maybe I'm supposed to keep it and hope for the best. I think most of the time you're going to get a little paid off for your aggressive mulligans when you have stuff like Stony Silence and Worship in your deck. Worship a little less. It's tougher to make that work on the mulligan, but again, it's in this matchup. I think you can make that card work, though it might be a bit of a trap. But particularly 3 Stony Silence makes it rewarding to mulligan a little more aggressively instead of just keeping a hand that's keepable, right? There's not a lot of incentive to keep that opening hand so much as that we don't want to mulligan. But either way, I'll see you in the next round in just a moment.